Hi guys, in this tutorial I will show you how to create a procedural jewelry chain, a so-called Cuban link chain with Blender geometry nodes. The first thing I do is switch to the geometry nodes tab and let's quickly add a reference image. I prepared my file to actually contain two images, so let's take the image editor and here we can see the chain, and as you can see, a Cuban link chain contains of individual links which are like a torus, a twisted torus, which is flattened on the top and at the bottom. So let's start. As you can see, this is the default Blender setup. Let's delete the camera and the light. We don't need it for now, and add a geometry node tree to our default cube. Let's delete the group input and start by creating a single link. So first thing I do is add a circle, and by the way I use the node tabber add-on, which lets you search the nodes by pressing tab and then search for the desired node. In my case I search for circle, and you can see it shows right here. And yeah, so to twist the circle I like to use the vector rotate node. So let's search for it, vector rotate, here we have it. And for this to work we need the set position node. Put it in here, plug the vector rotate and the position input, and you can see our circle disappears. That's because we need the position input for our vector rotate node. So simply add one position, and you can see it is the same as before because we haven't rotated. And I switch the vector rotate node to Euler, and here we can rotate it on the separate axes, the x axis and the y axis, and the z axis is kind of hard to see. So yeah, so my idea is to use the x position, which you can see is the red axis here in the viewport, and use it to twist our circle along its x-axis. So to do this, I first take a separate XYZ node and take our position, split it up in its individual components, and I do the opposite for the vector rotate input here to access the separate axes. Use the combine x, y, z, and here I take the x position for the x rotation, and that's a neat little trick to twist objects and to control the intensity of the twist. I simply take a multiply math node and multiply it with the value, and here you can see it controls the amount of the rotation. So I add a value node to access it from the outside, and for now I put it to 0.5. The next step is to solidify our circle to make a torus object, and we do this simply by the curve to mesh node. Shortcut with node tabber is simply CTM, and I need a profile curve which also is a circle, so we search for another circle, put it in here, and instead of controlling the radius here, is what I like to do is to keep this uniformly at 1 and use a separate node, which is the set radius node. And here I take another input node which controls our radius. Next thing, which is in my opinion the most important and characteristic of the Cuban link chain, is the flattened top and bottom of our twisted torus. So the basic idea is to take the set position of our vertices and clamp it at the bottom and at the top. And we can do this with a set position node. Take our position and we need to clamp the z-axis, so let's first separate our axes and then combine it. Same result as before, but now I can go in between here and take a maximum math node, and as you can see I can flatten the bottom with this, and the opposite is the minimum math node, and with this I can flatten the top. So to control both uniformly, I take a value node, set it to 2.5, plug it in here, and for this I need to negate it, so multiply it with -1. -1. And yeah, you can see it uniformly flattens the top and the bottom. So the next thing I like to do is to make the surface more smooth. As you can see, it's quite jagged here, and to make it more visible I choose a matcap viewport shading, and one possibility to do this is to simply add a subdivision surface node in here, and I simply reduce our profile curve to a resolution of 16 and our base circle to a resolution of 24, and in combination with our subdivision surface node it should look pretty smooth with a reasonable amount of topology. And yeah, so quickly rearrange our nodes a little bit before we do the next step. Beautiful. So next I like to create a curve on which I instance my chain link, and for this there are two options. The first one is to create it in our node tree, but actually I like to create my curve in the viewport to edit it here, and let's do this by adding a circle, scale it up a little bit, and give it a shape of a necklace, like maybe like this. Yeah, that looks reasonable. And back in our geometry node setup, I take an object info node and choose the Bezier circle as our instancer object. So let's take an instance on point node, take this for the points and our chain link for the instance object, and here you can see it starts to instance on the curve. So for now it uses the curve's points, which are actually 4 points, as you can see here, but we need more. So there are multiple options. What I like to do is to use the curve to points node, which the shortcut with Notable is CTP. And here I can control the count, which is pretty useful, but actually a more efficient way to do this is to set this to length, which gives us a constant length between the links. And here I set this to a reasonable amount. And yeah, but before we do this, I go on my instance on points node and change the scale for the links. So to make this uniformly, I can take a value node, which is a float, and put it in the vector input of the scale. And here I can change it to, yeah, let's say 0.2. And on curve to points node, I change the distance to, let's say, 0.25 or maybe 0.3. And yeah, this looks reasonable, but there's one problem. The instance on point node doesn't take the curve rotation or tangent in consideration. A simple way to make this happen is to take the rotation output of our curve to points and put it, plug it in the instance on points node. And now you can see something happens, but not the desired result. It looks like a candy necklace, but we don't want this. So one way to fix it is to simply take a transform node in here, our base link, and rotate it this. And it should be 90 degrees. Maybe on this axis too. Yes, this looks like our reference. And yeah, so I can go back at my curve and Control T controls the twist. So let's adjust this a little bit to make it follow the neck of our imaginable person. Okay, and looks pretty good so far. So the cool thing with our setup here is that we can take the curve and change its length, and because we set our instance curve to points node to a length, so the distance between the individual links, it always stays the same. So yeah, take the curve again, scale it up a little bit, and that's the base setup. So to make it more beautiful and reusable, I quickly create a node group out of this. So control all of our nodes and press Control G. Here's our node group. We can protect it and call it Cuban link chain. And let's add a few inputs. First, I take the twist amount. Let's call this link twist. Next one is the radius of our torus. Let's put it to 0.5 first, and then take the group input. link radius, or no, let's call it link thickness, which is more accurate. Link thickness. And next I like to do is to make the resolution accessible from the outside. So call this resolution 1. And our profile curve resolution 2. And also we create an input for our subdivision surface levels. And another input for our flatten controller. So we call this link flatten. Let's rearrange this a little bit. And what else can we do? We can make the distance between the links accessible. So let's call this link distance. And also the scale. Oh. Link scale. So the default is 0. We change this from the outside in a minute. Link distance is 0.3 default. Okay, so we go here and change the scale again. And we also need to change our flatten controller again. Then we adjust the distance. And here we can control various aspects of our chain, like the thickness again, or the twist. And this way we can create a desired chain. Let's make this node a little bit more beautiful by giving it a color. And yeah, the next step I'd like to do is to create a nice material for our chain. So open the shader editor, and by default our object has already a material. So I simply rename it to gold and give it a color. Switch our viewport to shaded mode, and you can see nothing happens. That's because we need to apply our material to our node tree. We can do this inside a node group and choose an apply material node, or how is it called? Set material. Then we can set the material here, and we can also make this accessible for our node group. So you can change it here. And then back to our shader editor, we can increase the metallic value to 1, and the roughness, we decrease it. And right now it looks really flat. That's because nothing can reflect in our chain, and for reflective surfaces it's really important that we have like an environment, so you can, for example, go into the world shader, and the standard way to do this is to use an HDRI map, but in this case I use a noise texture. Noise texture, and put it in here, and you can see that we now have a noisy background. Let's reduce the scale to 1 and increase the contrast with a color ramp node. Then I can reduce the detail because we don't need it to be this detailed. And right now, if I look at the chain, you can see that we have reflections, but we have this ugly background, and the way to quickly fix this is to use a light path node. And with this we can control which background gets rendered in our camera view. So simply duplicate the background, add a mix shader node, and then take the is camera array for our factor and change the order for this. And as you can see, everything that hits our camera directly gets rendered with the bottom shader, which I can control here, and everything else, which is like the diffuse lighting or the reflections, is controlled by our texture. So this is a neat little trick to quickly add some reflections. So the final thing I do is a little polishing. I add a camera. Let's change the camera focal length a little bit to make it more appear like a macro lens. And also we add depth of field. Yes. And change the f-stop. And we can see we need to decrease the f-stop to unrealistic values. That's because our chain might be really big in real world scale. And we can check this right here. The Bezier circle is 9 meters on the x-axis, which is really big for a chain. So quickly scale it down to a realistic value. Right now it's still really big. Scale it down a little bit more like this, and 30 centimeters looks good for a chain. So of course we need to adjust our link scale again, and also the distance, like 0.1 maybe, and this also 0.1 or 0.15. Yes, this looks good. And position it a little bit. Then back in our camera, of course I have to choose another position. Maybe like this, and we change the focal distance. And right now you can see that it's like more realistic f-stop values we can use here. So yeah, this is our Cuban link chain made with Blender geometry nodes. I hope you like this tutorial. It's a little bit spontaneous. Sorry for my bad English, by the way. I'm foreign speaker. You might guess this already. I'm from Germany. And like we say in Germany, vielen Dank fürs Zuschauen und bis zum nächsten Mal.